I'm trying to dramatize the distance we have to travel and how far we are from our destination, because I think these structures that we demolished to get to the modern world and to feed people and to give people a decent living, they jettison certain things which I think are fundamental to our lives. And I don't want to go back and say, look, we've all got to listen to the Pope, we've got to pretend that our Prime Minister or our President is a moral exemplar. Well, they're usually not. So how do we get back this idea that we are capable of greatness and we want to honour that in our civilization?
Nicholas, I feel we're at some sort of milestone here for people who've just jumped on. This video is the 9th in a playlist, so they should go back and watch the others. But if they haven't, set the scene for where we are. You said that part 1 is sort of, horizontal in our discussion of how to remake the world, and this is vertical. What's that mean?
Yeah, so the first 9 videos are about how, you might recall, I talk about a queue at an airport, and that's about our relations with each other and what we owe each other and how we interact with each other as equals. And one of the things that, now I'm a big fan of what's called sortition or selection by lottery, the sort of thing that gets people together in a jury and says they represent the public because they are a sampling from the public. And I think in this series is partly about what a contribution that idea can make to our politics, not just to our legal system. But as I've thought about this, I think something else has essentially gone missing. And that is that in the modern world, this sounds like a strange thing to say because it's at such a deep level, but in the modern world, I think we've kind of lost touch with the distinction between good and bad. Now, that sounds like a weird thing to say, and it is a bit weird thing to say, and I don't even fully understand it myself. But one way that I've tried to talk about that is that if you look around at a modern city, we are the first civilization that where a great until, say, before World War II, still until after World War II, if you were going to build many houses, most houses were quite beautiful in their own way, and certainly major public buildings were quite lovely. And they're not anymore. They're just a big bunch of boxes. And that hasn't happened in Chinese civilization or Japanese civilization or Indian civilization. It wasn't true of our civilization until very recently. And so I've got a few theories about what's going on there, but that's what I want to put at the center of a bunch of these videos, because I think we can't operate. We've got a very democratic vibe to our society in one way, but we can't operate without models of excellence. We can't operate without things to look up to. And now we kind of look up to billionaires, and that's kind of it. And that's a pretty bad situation. So I think that is important in our politics, and that's what the next few videos are about. And I've even got something to say about what we might do about that, but that'll be in a couple of videos' time.
Just as a kind of a checks and balance on that, though, when you think about this, say, the visual evidence for this worry you have, like buildings, how do you check against confirmation bias? And, if you've got a weird feeling about the world and you start looking and seeing, and then suddenly everything seems to tally with it, do you have, I suppose, like an inbuilt Nicholas's own interior bullshit detector to make sure you're not getting carried away?
Well, I had that pretty alive and well for a long time, and of course our culture is terrified. It has this concept that if something is a little bit subjective or something can't be defined, so you could write it in a computer program, maybe it's just all your subjectivity. But I just keep looking. I mean, when I visit my in-laws in a little town called Queanbeyan in Australia, near the capital, which is called Canberra, there is an old railway station which would have been built in about 1910. And it's just lovely, Colm. Yeah. It is just lovely. And when I go and see the Legislative Council and the Legislative Assembly in Melbourne that was built towards the end of the 19th century. These are certainly the Legislative Council is a completely sublime building, but that kind of thing was so ordinary at that stage. Sometimes you didn't get an absolute cracker, but we were building buildings like that as a matter of course. Railway stations were like that. Albury Railway Station between Melbourne and Sydney is just a gem on a larger scale than Queanbeyan. So am I to just say, well, because I can't prove to someone who wants to say, well, you're just having a lean of yourself, because I can't prove that I'm right, am I supposed to let go of that idea? I'm happy to let go of that idea, I guess, in that I'm not going to insist on it. I'm going to keep thinking there's a problem, but then I see it around in lots of other places. I see the way in which we've done this with behaving well in politics.
Yeah.
So,
And even
yeah,
kindness as a weakness is a new
yeah,
thing, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
I don't remember a time where you could sneer so much at people for even misguidedly caring
yeah,
about an
yeah,
issue. I mean,
yeah,
people were always called tree huggers, or people were always sneered at for, being bleeding heart liberals, but
yeah,
this feels far more weaponized now. I see the comment, if you complain about anything online, I try not to get involved in any online debate because it's such a waste of energy. But I
yeah,
see the phrase "cry more" as a reply to people. If somebody is saying this is awful,
yeah,
the reply from whether it's a bot
yeah,
or a real
yeah,
person
yeah,
is
yeah,
"cry
yeah,
more,"
yeah, yeah,
and sometimes you need to cry.
yeah, yeah,
But it's
yeah.
it's never before in this time of wellness and people supposedly being in touch with their feelings has there been such a war on kindness, altruism. Maybe it's cynicism built up upon 50 years of liberal democracy, which has often been using kindness as a mask for the same old shit.
Well, another way to think about this is to say that we want to comprehend things, and we want to comprehend it with the flick of a button on our social media feed. We are becoming more and more intolerant of any kind of excellence which might take you a while to comprehend. We're just constantly being hit with this sort of sugar hit stuff. Again, fast food is an example. So, I find fast food delicious at least for the first 90 seconds. and it's an acquired taste to understand that fast food isn't terribly even nice, but it's certainly nice when it first hits you. And so there are all these things about our lives which we learn slowly to get better at. And some people do that, particularly with food. There's never been as much connoisseurship of food. Well, I think I've got the word wrong there because we talk about connoisseurship with art, but you know what I mean. You might be able to tell me what the word I'm missing is. Uh,
Good
but
chef, that's all I can think of.
what's that?
Good chef, that's all I can think of.
Yeah, but the thing is that we are in a culture which is a kind of wham bam culture, and it's a culture in which you can tell that some people listening may disagree, but you can tell when you bite into a McDonald's hamburger or a bit of KFC that it's really very nice, sort of immediately. But you're not getting your comprehension of the taste. It's basically just treating you like a bit of a fool as far as your tastes are concerned. And it takes a while to appreciate the good things in life. And we're not that interested in that. So there you are. That's a return back to this idea that I've put to you, which is use your eyes, look around a modern city, and the idea of beauty sitting at the heart of so many buildings. Walk around Paris, even London, and look at 19th century houses, but certainly 19th century public buildings. And there's something very powerful about a commitment there to deploy this thing called architecture in a way that really sings. Everyone understands the language and they like it, and so on.
I mean, it's a huge thought because if let's pick architecture or let's stay with the idea of architecture as a metaphor for something bigger. I mean, the reason why things are built a certain way, it's also because technology has enabled things to happen far more quickly.
Yeah,
Design is modular design, materials, the huge increase in the use of glass as the facade. So, I mean, I suppose what you're complaining about or noticing is also a byproduct of what would be seen as good, which is, change in technology. Similarly with media and availability and
Yeah,
food and
yeah,
availability,
yeah,
that the question is it like, are these goals of the design, or are they byproducts of technology having
yeah.
improved?
Well, I thought, yes, I would add not just technology having changed and improved in many ways in terms of efficiency, but also the pressure that a market system imposes on reducing costs is an important thing. But it isn't the whole story, because I remember in my suburb in Melbourne, in Australia, there are tram lines in Melbourne and there are tram lines in St Kilda, which is about 3 or 4 miles away. And the posts on which the electricity wires, overhead electricity wires, are hoisted in Port Melbourne are kind of brutal and entirely utilitarian. The people who've built them, it has not occurred to them to say, how do we build these so they're beautiful? And the amount of extra cost involved in that, I think, is minuscule. It's just not hard. I mean, if you don't want to do anything that is ornamental, you just think of proportions. And it's just obvious that the thinking's not there. You've just got a post and then you've got another one a bit higher because they needed it a bit higher, and there it is. You go to St Kilda and they're not masterpieces, but they're just lovely. They're built in the 1920s or something, I suspect, and they've just got little sort of French curlicues, and they wouldn't have cost much to do, and you mass produce them once you've got the design, and it simply didn't occur to someone. I find that extraordinary. But anyway, I'm not really trying to. I don't want to complain about that as itself. It's a kind of clue to
Yeah.
what's happened. And the other thought that I have is that I think one of the things we've done is that we fell in love with it comes out of Newtonian physics. It's also in economics, which is that you don't talk about the thing itself. You talk about something that you come to understand as an equilibrium of forces. So the previous pre-Newtonian physics was that, Christian physics was that angels carried the planets through the air. Well, that's bullshit. But it has a beauty to it, and it's trying to explain these extraordinary phenomena in a way that connects with our sense that beauty somehow is central to our lives in a very, I don't want to make this precious, but it's just a very, we built cathedrals, we built the Parthenon, we just have done these incredible things. And so and one of the things that economics does is it comes along and it says the best possible thing you can do is to have a competitive market and a balance between supply and demand all being produced competitively. And apart from that, we don't care what gets made. Potato chips are the same as silicon chips. Well, they're not. It's not a bad way to think. It's going to help you in some ways, but it leaves some stuff out, and it's pretty important stuff.
To what extent do you think, because just trying to make the leap then from what you would see as the decline of beauty in architecture and a
Yeah, or
disappearance of
goodness, intrinsic goodness. That's what I'm
curlicue,
getting at.
yeah,
Yeah,
disappearance of
yeah,
curlicues in tram posts,
yeah, yeah,
but and going back to the idea of it being a byproduct of something else. I mean, like, is it not the case that the system, which has deprioritized beauty, prioritized speed, that is what has fed 8 billion people? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah,
how
yeah,
do we
yeah,
know that
yeah.
the counterfactual, that the
No,
the
no, I
90,
agree with that, and I'll
yeah,
go further and say that one of the so I'm wanting to connect this idea of beauty with goodness and goodness with leadership. That's kind of the plot here, and all this beauty that we had in the past was connected up to pyramids of power and patronage. So that's not necessarily something I'm recommending. I'm trying to dramatize the distance we have to travel and how far we are from our destination, because I think these structures that we demolished to get to the modern world and to feed people and to give people a decent living, they jettison certain things which I think are fundamental to our lives.
okay,
And I don't want to go back and say, look, we've all got to listen to the Pope. We've got to pretend that our Prime Minister or our President is a moral exemplar. Well, they're usually not. So how do we get back this idea that that we are capable of greatness, and we want to honour that in our civilization. I've been listening to a biography of Martin Luther King recently, and he's just an amazing dude, just an amazingly a man who thinks, right, well, I believe in God, and I believe God has told me to do this stuff, and I'm going to fucking well do it. Uh,
And
I
what
think that
babies
we
have we
don't do
thrown
that
out
anymore.
with the bathwater? So, like,
What's that?
what baby have we thrown out with the bathwater if we have, you talk about jettisoning
Yeah,
certain principles.
yeah.
What, as we head into the next set, just to kind
Well,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
characterize.
so, so I think what's happened is that the ancient world thought about goodness as excellence in being human. They thought that goodness was something that you built with your character over a long period of time. And then Christianity, I don't have anything against Christianity. It's a different way to look at the world. It has lots of great things. I mean, the thing about Christianity was that it was so radical in saying everybody was equal. Wow, what an incredibly radical religion at the time. But one of the things that comes out of classical Christianity, say during medieval times, is that you've got God up here, and God's basically wants you to be an absolute hero 24/7. There's the good thing to do and the bad thing to do. And your every minute of the day is a psychodrama. Now, that's not true for Aristotle or Plato or Socrates or any of these people. They're thinking of life as a journey, and think of the difference between these two words, morality. Think of how cut and dried, good and bad, good and evil that is, and ethics. Ethics are just different. They're just a different thing. I don't like morality, and I do like ethics. So those are some of the things that happen. I'll just say one other thing, which is that Aristotle talked about, I think he used the example of a knife, and he said, you can't know what a knife is without a definition of what a knife is also tells you the difference between a good knife and a bad knife. That's an incredibly profound idea. It does, so the goodness and the badness doesn't separate out with the god of knives up there. It is, and so, am I a good man? Am I a bad man? Is this a good knife? Is this a bad knife? It's part of my makeup. I'm now living that drama, and somehow that's fallen out of the modern world, I think, and I can't entirely put my finger on it. But I think that's part of the story of what we talked about architecture. It's part of the story of what would have been called, I guess, by Plato, the good, and our having lost touch with it. And then finally, if we're ever going to get back there, it's a hard trip because we can't just give it to the great and powerful leader or the Pope or any of those things. It's got to be, if we're going to be a democratic, how do we live with a vivid sense of the good, a vivid sense of our choices as we live our lives, and for that to be democratic, not to just look up to people who are above us on the social scale and all that sort of stuff. Does that
Two
make
things.
sense to you?
It does, yeah. Two things. You mentioned ethics, and it's interesting that we we definitely use the word ethical a lot
Yeah,
in our marketing, but
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
necessarily ethics. And I'm not nitpicking a differentiation between the two, but just noticing how I see ethical as a marketing slogan
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
and I
I
think
agree,
they've
and that's a
lost
terrible
meaning.
thing. That's a terrible thing. That is an example. That's an example of the very dumbing down, the very illiteracy with the concepts that I would point to. And of course, that's our society. It's competitive. This is capitalism, PR. It will grab anything that might generate some value for it. But yeah, I find the use of the throwing around of this word ethical consumption, all this stuff. I mean, I get it. I'm not against some of it, but it strikes me as ethically illiterate to just throw that word around like that.
But isn't the problem from the point of view of the individual, like so many things in our lives, we've sort of outsourced the decision to
Yeah,
somebody else.
yeah, yeah.
So
We bought it. We bought
I
it.
have bought things based on the fact that it
Yeah,
says ethically sourced.
that's
I've
right.
made no
Yeah,
effort because I'm making a quick decision in a supermarket.
yeah,
So I have outsourced the ethics
Yeah, that's right.
to
Well,
the
and
supply
they've
chain.
worked out a way to make the ethics part of their marketing. So, I mean, and a very good example of this, I mean, I don't think it's all that relevant here, but as an economist, I can tell you that if you go and buy fair trade coffee, then you will pay substantially more for that coffee. And if you ask how many cents goes to the person selling it and how many cents goes to the coffee grower gets about 1/20th of the margin, of the marketing margin. So that's nice. Personally, I'd rather take some money and give it to the coffee growers or try and work out how do I do good with this, not how do I turn this yearning we all have that we're doing a lot better than people who grow coffee into a product. Because that's a terrible way, that's an amazingly inefficient way of helping them, making it a tiny part of our own desire to be pandered to, basically.
Nice word there, yearning. So let's assume people are watching this because they have a yearning for something better.
Yeah.
What will we be talking about over the next few videos to turn that yearning into
Yeah.
action?
So the next video, I'm hoping, Colm, you'll say, how did you, why did you put that clip in that begins the video? And I'll tell you, it's a pretty fun story. And then, so the next video asks this question: how come, at least according to some reasonable studies, the proportion of psychopaths, narcissists, and Machiavellians at the top of our society is about 4 times what it is in the general population? How did we build systems that systematically help the worst among us? Now, they do all sorts of other things. I'm not trying to tell you they're all bad. And these, when I say 4 times, that's from 1% of the population to 4% of the population. But if you're in a firm that's run by one of those people, it's a pretty unpleasant experience and it's a pretty inefficient experience. Then I'm going to go on to the next video is the big reveal, which is a way to build an institution that recognizes merit, that excellence, the good, if you like, which doesn't create a competition which all the bad guys will immediately say, how do I hack this to get to the top? And that, I think, was a thrilling discovery of mine now over a year or more ago. And then we're going to have a look at the ways in which we ended up finding new ways to promote people who are really, really good at what they do on the internet that were not available to us outside that world. So that's a quick introduction to part 2 before we get on to part 3 and we solve all the known problems of the human race.
Very good. And I like the way we've condensed that into short videos because of the depth of attention span of everybody. Looking forward to meeting the Machiavellians, narcissists, and psychopaths, and hoping I don't recognize myself in any of them.
You're not in
Thanks
it.
for that.
You're not in it. Thanks very much, Colm.